Hi guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Nuggets News, or our monthly Ethereum and DeFi update. Today we've got a very special guest, and the clue was Baywatch. So for those of you that know David, his last name is Hoffman. So well done who picked up on that. But we welcome back regular guest Anthony Sassano, and we've got so much to talk about. Any ideas just off top of your head before we get into it all in terms of what you've seen and noticed in the past few weeks, either of you?
Anthony, you want to start?
Yeah. I guess the last few weeks have been insane with yield farming, right? That's been the narrative. That's what's dominated everything. We saw with, I guess, like the YAM launch. And then after that, there was Curve in the same week. That was probably the craziest week in DeFi that I've experienced to date, which was, it was just insane.
Yeah. Agree.
The Lamb launch was the first time where I just dropped everything in my life and just started to paying attention to yield farming, because like maybe it's probably not like a full-time activity, but it can be. And the great thing about YAM was that it was such a great like entry level yield farming. It's just like take your assets, put them in a box, you get YAMs, and it was really simple. And so I think it was really accessible, and that's kind of why I think YAMs blew up to the degree that they did.
I think with crypto, like you say, sometimes there's these times where you drop everything to do it. And as a trader, it might be when things are on a tear and you want to do some leverage trading. As a yield farmer, it might be these weekends where these opportunities pop up and there's these huge APYs. Mm-hmm. And that's why we're also passionate about education, because if you understand what to do, it's only a few clicks. Do you want to maybe talk about that, David, in terms of what you're actually doing? Because some people go, hold on, why are you just depositing these assets? Are they being lent out and earning these yield? Why am I getting yams? How does that work for just the beginner?
Yeah, and that's actually a really hard question to answer, because every single protocol does something with the assets in their own particular way, right? And so I think that the earlier yield farming mechanism, after comp, was really like Yearn was the really interesting like pop-up shop yield farm that kind of came out of the nowhere. And like as somebody that follows the DeFi space, like I went camping that weekend, and so I lost it. There was no way for me to like get a grip on what was happening, and I needed to learn and study like what was going to happen when I deposit my liquidity, deposit my assets into the Yearn system. Like I need to go look and understand what's going on there.
Yes.
And so I let it blow by me. And then again, like in stark contrast to YAMs, where like I read the Medium article, and the Medium article says like, okay, you take your assets and you deposit it into the contract, and they don't do anything. And that was very easy for me to learn. Like, and then I felt like I had done my own research. Like I knew that they weren't going to get lent out. I didn't have to understand those risks, and like it was very intuitive.
Yeah.
And so each different protocol leverages assets differently, which is why it's kind of hard to keep up with this space, is because it's not like a copy paste. We're all doing the same thing. It's like it's the same pattern, but you have to figure out how the pattern is different this time.
We might talk about Yearn.finance in a second, because that's an example of one that I think is doing, there's a few that are doing very similar things, and this is the one that's probably done it the best. But at the other end of the spectrum, you have the YAMs. And do you have any thoughts on this, Anthony? Because like David just said, you're putting your tokens in to get their governance token back, but it's not actually doing anything. So this to me is the end of the spectrum that is more just pure speculation, house of cards sort of stuff. Or do you feel there could be some value in having these governance tokens, spaghetti, ham, tendies? It got out of hand at one stage there. But what are your thoughts on the speculative ones?
Yeah, so I think, even though the assets are doing nothing, as in they're not being lent out or anything like that, they're just kind of staked and parked there. I think if we look at the holistic picture, they're actually doing something in that they're getting these communities involved with YAM. So with YAM, you could stake SNX, right? Which means the synthetic Spartans are now YAM holders are now involved with YAM and now spreading the word of YAM, right? Same with things like Lend. You got the Avengers, as they like to call themselves. You have all these sub communities that came together, and this is why YAM blew up, right? Because they got all these sub communities together into one big kind of, I guess you could call it like a city for an analogy, and they had a big party right around YAMs. Yeah. So even though the assets aren't doing anything themselves, you still have that second order effect there. And there was also another part of YAM. There was two different pools. There was the staking pool, and then there was the Uniswap pool, where you could put assets on Uniswap, and then that would actually provide liquidity for people to trade YAMs as well. So that was like, I guess, like the functional part of it. But the first pool was basically just to get all these people together towards like a common goal.
So if the person at home is a pure investor, and I think a lot of the time this is where sometimes people like Bitcoin maximalists get really upset and they go, that is doing nothing there. But at the other end of the spectrum, you guys talk a lot about this bankless nation and this idea of building an online community with no borders. And I'm hoping we can get Ryan on one of these episodes soon as well. But what you've just described, it's almost like the early days where you're getting together these different armies and saying, hey, rather than fighting each other, let's all be part of Europe, for example, and come together, and they're all partying and having a good time, and it's all a little bit speculative, but they're going and pushing that nation forward and growing, and rather than being tribal. And to me, that's a big win that maybe people aren't speaking about yet, versus Link versus XRP, which one's better? You're getting everyone together and getting excited, and maybe they do something in future, maybe they don't, but there's nothing to lose there. Any thoughts there, David?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think Vance from Frameworks Ventures said it best on his episode with Dimitri on Hidden Forces, where he really made the comparison that a lot of the big DeFi tokens that have done well, that have perhaps started off this bull market, are tokens that started in 2017 and then had a community that got grilled through the bear market, right? And so they like were in the telegrams, in the Discord, like they're losing money because it's the bear market, and that's what happens in bear markets. And they're all losing money together, and they're all following this protocol. They're all helping the protocol get better, and then the protocol survives through the night and comes out on the other side with this like evangelist community that has grown together. And so now there's culture. This community grew a culture together. They grew memes together. They learned how to virally spread their token together, and they became part of, and since everything is on Ethereum, these are all individual tribes, but they're not tribal. They're tribes. And the cool thing about composability in Ethereum applications is that there is now composability in community. Yeah. And when you stick all these communities together, that's what I've been calling like the bankless nation, right? Is these communities of people that are here for whatever reasons that they see fit, but they are still part of this like coherent like body of people that are all trying to generally have the same goals.
Yeah. In 2017, I think it even was, I did a video about why these coins all correlated and sort of saying in future, it's my hope that they'll move their own paths. And I think that'll happen at the end of next year, which is 2018. Now, that was way too early, but I think we have started to see things move on fundamentals. And that to me is very, very exciting. Now, things are still moving together somewhat, but we've got less of every coin being paired against Bitcoin on Bittrex or Poloniex. And now we've got a lot of coins paired on ETH, and there's the flow of funds between ETH and these DeFi alts that we're starting to see. And then you've got the Uniswap pools, and we're going to have new market makers and liquidity providers and stuff where you can pair other assets together. So they're going to start to all move independently. That's very exciting. But the leader in this space has become Yearn.finance. And for people at home, the quick summary is pull your assets, deposit them, I should say, and then they will find the best yield for you. And the beauty of this is that when gas is $30, it moves all 1,000 investors at once from DAI to the other DAI pool where there's a high yield. So that is one transaction, and now all of a sudden it's $30 divided by 1,000. So any thoughts on that? Do you want to start, Anthony?
Yeah, this is something that I think is going to be the next big thing in DeFi. We're currently building out Set V2, and one of these things are these pooled yield farming strategies. Now, you described it really well, where this capital can basically be profit-seeking and not have to be expensive for people. So there are some fees involved, like there's a withdrawal fee of 0.5% on the Yearn.finance vaults, and there's a 5% fee on the subsidized gas. But if you do the math and run the numbers, you still come out on top, right? Rather than doing it yourself. And this is much better for smaller investors too. Say you have like $1,000, for example, just for you to farm on something like Curve would probably eat up all that capital, because actually depositing stable coins into Curve and withdrawing them is very, very expensive, like hundreds of dollars, right? Yes. So you can just spend like a couple of dollars or a few dollars in gas to get into this capital pool on Yearn.finance. And then, yeah, it's all handled for you automatically. So that is going to keep getting better and better and evolve more and more, especially at high gas prices. Like before, this wouldn't really make sense, I think, for a lot of people. A lot of people, under like 10 Gwei, for example, it was still cheap, right? But it's not just, I guess, the cost. It's also the fact that yield farming is very complex for new people. So if they can just buy into something, like they could just buy a token, for example, on an exchange, like it's that easy, then they're going to do that rather than do it themselves, I think.
And David, any thoughts on unit bias with the beginners go, hey, best coins under $1? This deliberately, I think Andre deliberately launched this with a supply of only 30,000. It was very fair. Do you want to talk about all that?
Yeah. I actually was talking to my co-host on POV Crypto today about whether there is such thing as like an inverse unit bias, where like it's expensive on purpose, and that actually for some reason works to its advantage. Like it's an exclusive club. I think that's interesting. Very hard to actually deduce, but I do think there is value in having a more concentrated set of stakeholders, right? Because like Yearn has really been advantaged with being able to be nimble with governance. And so I don't actually think that it would be good if there were 10,000 different governors like governing over the system. We just need a concentrated few to really make this thing nimble and lively. And to add on to what Anthony was saying, like I think what the gas savings is one of the great like scaling mechanisms that Ethereum has that I don't think we really talk about. When we talk about Ethereum scaling, we talk about sharding, L2s, and like rollups, but we don't talk about developers just making things just more efficient, right? And like the metaphor that I use to kind of compare this is like if you go buy an Xbox 360 game when it came out, and then you go buy an Xbox 360 game like that came out a couple years ago, the graphics are insanely better because developers figured out how to be more efficient with what they had. Yeah. And I think this is kind of why the main L1 chain will always be generally accessible even to people with small capital, is because like even people with $500 get that value back, and they just, so long as they leave it in there long enough, right? And so it kind of democratizes access in ways that we haven't really considered before.
Yeah, I mean, if I would push back on one thing, I'm not sure if this works if you need a minimum of one Wi-Fi token, because you were saying it helps having a smaller pool of people. In theory, you can have just as many people in a small token or a large token, but I think the opposite of unit bias is true. Maker did it really well. I think the way that it works is that it only brings in the OGs, because noobs weren't chasing a $400 Maker coin, and noobs aren't chasing a $3,000 Wi-Fi coin. It brings in the hardcore believers that are doing their research, and I think that works in your favor. So is that true with governance, that you can vote with 0.1 of a Wi-Fi?
Yeah, you can totally do that. But I think you're right. I think the expensive token has kind of been a filter out of noise, right? Like people that might have gotten tricked by the XRP token bias are not getting tricked, like are not being convinced to buy the Wi-Fi token. And the people that are the types of people that would have gotten tricked by that trick, I don't really want governing Yearn.
Well, you've poked the bee's nest, so we might as well go there. So just a few hours ago, there was an interview released. Joe Lubin, ConsenSys, JPMorgan, they've partnered up, and apparently they are building JP coin, stable coins, interbank payments. They're going to merge this private fork with the Ethereum public chain. They're basically saying this is going to replace the Swift network. So to me, that is a big nail in XRP Ripple coffin. Have you guys read this news yet? What do you think of it?
I didn't read all of it yet, but I did see people talking about it. I mean, not just this news, but like over the years, it's pretty obvious that like XRP is never going to be used for its intended purpose, right? And it's pretty obvious to me that Ripple is not really going to go anywhere. Like to me, Ethereum is the world settlement layer. Is going to be. I mean, it's not yet, but to me, it's going to be. And you know, big companies or big enterprises like JPMorgan doing things on Ethereum just further signals to other enterprises that this is the place you want to be building, right? This is the legitimate platform that we are familiar with, that we have partners with, like ConsenSys does a lot of enterprise stuff. So, and it's neutral, right? Like it's not, Ethereum's not controlled by anyone. So if you want to be on a mainnet where you have those kind of like guarantees that your competitors aren't going to be able to leverage it to their, advantage over you, I think that's better than, something that, I mean, the people following Ripple will argue that it's decentralized, but it's so obviously not because, most of the nodes or whatever are run by Ripple. There's a bunch of stuff there. So yeah, I mean, it's always been obvious to me, but I'm with you. This is just another nail in the coffin.
Anything to add there, David? I mean, I know it's going to upset a lot of people. They're going to talk about why you still need this XRP, and they talk about this bridge, but I don't see that bridge or that concept. But
No, it's to me, it's becoming more and more clear every single day that like Ripple just found a narrative, a 2017 narrative that they could run with, like, hey, we'll be the coin that the banks will use. And then people just give them money because that's what 2017 was. But like really, XRP is this token that is this middleman between two banks trying to achieve their goals. And how can you be thinking that people want XRP when people actually want dollars all over the world? And also dollars, stablecoin, crypto dollars are at an all-time high, both in value and volume, right? Like the people aren't going to use this other like highly volatile coin that that specifically benefits this company, where there are much more neutral crypto dollars available to you that are plenty more liquid.
And if we can maybe step out again another step, and you guys have both heard me talk about my digital thick shake theory, where the payment rails and DeFi and ETH and stable coins, that's just going to be the rails where money's moving around the world. But in the meantime, I think the crypto exchanges are going to go aggressively to become the neobanks of the world. So you've got a race between the banks, and this month we saw Thailand's central bank talk about integrating DeFi. But then you've got the Binances that have integrated we saw FTX integrate. You can sit your coins now in the compound USDT and automatically accrue interest. This is just amazing to see. It's all happening, and the exchanges are very aware of it. And it's, to me, again, that's just another middle step before we go fully bankless and crypto exchangeless.
Yeah, I mean, David and Ryan talk about this concept a lot. I think they call it the protocol sink thesis, where a lot of these centralized kind of institutions are just going to tap into these decentralized rails, like or DeFi, for example, because they offer better products at the end of the day. I've had this, this theory for ages as well, because when I first saw Maker and I saw kind of CDPs as they were known back then, I thought, well, a lot of people aren't going to be able to over collateralize. So how is this going to be accessible to normal people? Well, these centralized institutions will pop up, use the Maker rails, right? They eat the risk of the over collateralization and the liquidation risk and everything, and they underwrite it all. And then they just make money from lending it out to people, right? Like we normally do. But instead of going to a bank, they go to Maker, right? So, I mean, David can talk more about what him and Ryan do with the protocol sync thesis, but I mean, it's playing out so fast. Like I didn't expect centralized parties to get involved this fast, but it makes sense because they're losing, right? The volumes on decentralized exchanges are already catching up to some centralized exchanges, right? And if we had, I guess like if when we have scaling, it's going to just be like a really quick thing where it's like, well, why would I use a centralized exchange where I can get a similar experience, but hold custody of my assets, access all of Ethereum DeFi on this other kind of like layer 2 exchange or something like that. So yeah, it's going to happen very fast, I think.
You've just said something really important there as well, Anthony, that we often talk about negative interest rates being another driver for people to hold their own coins and whatnot. But banks make money from lending at the long end of the curve and the differential. And if you've got 12%, 20%, 100% in DeFi, banks can get that and make the difference and take on the risk. We've just seen Binance list Nexus Mutual. They're going to know how to insure these things, whether it's Lloyd's of London or the decentralized option, and they can borrow and they can make money, and they can make more money in the crypto world than in the real world, lending to crypto startups and that. So yeah, I'd love to hear more about the sync thesis. And have you thought about that concept as well, David?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Really, the fundamental pattern here is that there's a ton of value in DeFi, right? There's a ton of things you can do if you have assets, you can have credit in DeFi. If you have assets, you can get yield in DeFi. And the yields are really strong and the credits are really, really good right now, at least in relation to how volatile these currencies are. And really what that means is that like me and Anthony as DeFi enthusiasts, we just go straight to the heart of these things because that's what we want to do. But protocols can really just be this UI layer that offers you the same basic services, but takes a cut, just takes a spread. And for that cut, for that profit that they're taking, they ultimately have to like protect their users, because we've seen users go to the places that protect them. And that's why Binance got such a big claim to fame in 2017 is they got hacked and then they refunded everyone the money. And then volume just came to Binance. And so the centralized exchanges that can tap into DeFi, get their users yield for them, because we know that we want that. Of course we know we want that because of Yearn, right? That's basically like the yield farming thing for people that just want yield. People are just going to go to centralized exchanges to get yield too, and the centralized exchanges are going to give it to them. And not only that, but like centralized exchanges are going to have their day over the next 2 years. And I think it's going to come from, like I said, offering yield in the protocol. And so like Coinbase is going to offer, like it already offers 2%. It's really low. They're going to offer something more. And then they're also going to offer credit and debit cards that have like 6% whatever baked in, right? And so these are the new banks. These are the new Wells Fargos. You have your credit card, you have your debit card, but instead of Wells Fargo giving you 1/4%, you have Coinbase or Binance that's giving you 8 or 12%. And that's just a use case that everyone could get on board with.
Absolutely. And we've already seen, Dharma, a number of mobile apps rolling out. Aave have just got another financial services license of some type. Coinbase have got cards. Binance have rolled out their cards in Europe. This is happening. And there was another interesting report put out a few days ago by, I think it was Sentiment, and I shared it on Twitter, but they were talking about the velocity of money. And you look at the curve of the US economy, and velocity of money's crashed down to like 1. And the velocity of the stable coins and DAI was like nearly 20. And that just shows you the money that is circulating and how fast this economy is growing compared to the legacy economy. So anything else to add to that, guys? We'll move on to scaling.
Yeah, I mean, just I guess like on your point quickly about the velocity of money. Bitcoin pioneered this, right? Where you could send Bitcoin across the world like really, really quickly. And Ethereum is just taking this to the next level where you can send, crypto dollars or like, stable dollars around the world or anything. I mean, any unit of value on Ethereum. But the fact that the stable coins have grown so much, is not surprising. Especially when, I always find it insane when my friends tell me that they're waiting for their deposit to go in to the bank, like in the US. Yeah. It's like, what? I have instant deposits in Australia for to an exchange, right? And then I'm like, well, this is just crazy. No wonder people are using Ethereum as a rail, even though it's maybe the fees are expensive. It's still a much better experience than waiting days for your deposit to be credited, right?
Yeah. And maybe before we go into scaling, because we want to talk about all these concepts, but it's important to note that, hey, you guys can't do all of this if we can't scale. So we'll get to that in a second. But you've been doing a lot of work with Realty, David, who are doing the tokenized real estate, but we're already starting to hear about other things that can be collateral, whether it's your Ethereum name, if that becomes valuable, or these NFTs, anything that is collectible, or anything that can be tokenized and has value can now be used as collateral. And there's talk about getting a mortgage from Aave. They've started delegating credit scores, so I can say I trust Anthony. But not only that, they've now done the credit default swaps. So you might hear that word and think, oh my gosh, GFC, it's all going to crash. But in the crypto world, in theory, it's far more collateralized, or the risk is more transparent. It's on chain. There are fallback mechanisms. And we're not going to tokenize your dog, Anthony, but
sorry.
Do you want to talk about all that, David, with the credit default swaps and everything that you see being tokenized and how someone can get money that a bank says no to?
Yeah. I think one of the big bull sci-fi cases for Ethereum is that anything that has value can become collateralized, right? There's a big gap, big chasm between where we are now and where that is, because the reason why it's not every single token on Ethereum is inside of MakerDAO or Aave is that it's hard, right? There's each asset has its own personality, each asset has its own life, and therefore it has its own risk parameters. And that's what actually really excites me about Aave is they seem to be the move really fast team. And when there's so many tokens coming to Ethereum, the team that can move really fast and integrate them all does really well. But at the same time, there's also risks with that because you can only be so careful, right? And so having the ENS name David, which I don't have but I want, is something that I think would be really, really valuable and something that you can extract value from. The houses are the OG collateral to get a line of credit from. But in Ethereum, where everything is just 100, 1,000 times more liquid than what they are in the legacy world, there's no reason why you can't tap into just the leverage of all of your assets.
Yeah. Like we had a little walk around Decentraland the other day live on a stream, and I'm going to set up a Nuggets News building there and maybe have some get togethers and have a like a cinema where we'll have our education and maybe even a service desk where we'll upload our tutorials, and maybe that land and that building becomes valuable and you can use it as collateral. So yeah, they're all the things that really excite me. But let's maybe move on to scaling, because it's been a huge month. Anthony, I know you're across a lot of this stuff. Where do you want to start here with some of the different assets that have come from nowhere to scale Ethereum?
Yeah, so I think maybe the biggest scaling news over the past couple of weeks is the OMG Network / Tether kind of partnership, right? Where Tether and OMG have partnered up to bring USDT to the OMG network in order to get it off mainnet, because I guess USDT is number 2 at the moment, but it was number 1 in terms of how much gas each kind of like contract uses on Ethereum. Number 1's Uniswap at the moment. But yeah, so they're moving towards this layer 2 on OMG, where they can actually interface with different exchanges and do their kind of centralized exchange arbitrage on this layer 2, because most USDT transactions are just that, right? They're arbitrage between centralized exchanges, and that doesn't need to be on layer 1, right? That just clogs the chain, if I'm being honest, and it's kind of a waste of space for the Ethereum mainnet, or layer 1. So getting that onto layer 2 was really exciting. It's probably going to be slow to adopt, because you need all the people, like all the exchanges, to adopt it right. You need the people that do these arbitrage to maybe rewrite their bots to work in the OMG network. You need them to get used to it. They're not going to trust it if their assets can be seized in some way, or right, if they're worried about that, they have to understand the risks. So, I mean, yes, USDT has risks as well, because there's backdoors in that too, but, they might be comfortable with those risks, whereas something else they might be worried about. So that is the biggest news. And there's a few other things, like dYdX is partnering up with StarkWare to release something by end of the year for their perpetual contracts.
Yes.
There's rumors that Uniswap is going to be moving to layer 2 with their V3. So, I mean, I've argued this for a while, that these high gas fees are just going to speed up layer 2 adoption, and we're already seeing it, right? The past couple of months has seen so much of this adoption coming out, so many teams being like, okay, we need to look at layer 2 now, or else our protocol is going to stop growing, or it's going to actually be priced out. Some things have actually been priced out, like NFTs, for example, are priced out right now, which is unfortunate. And DAOs as well, to an extent, because they're expensive to deploy. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of like what I'm seeing over the past few weeks and months in terms of like layer 2.
And when you say priced out, I think what Anthony means is you can't really hold an on-chain vote or sell collectibles that are a few dollars when gas is $30. So it forces those teams to speed up and adopt layer 2 solutions. In terms of Amisa Go, that's one of the security things I think it has in its favor, is exits are very safe to do, so people shouldn't be too afraid of losing their assets. But what is going to be interesting for me, and we spoke about this when we first interviewed Sam from FTX, and he spoke about Tether and the network effects, and everyone switched over to ETH all at once because it was quicker to do, but then everyone did it. But then you saw, Tron, Algorand, EOS, I think it was on 8 different chains, but now Amisa Go are doing it. Is that going to be different because you can still move Ethereum ERC-20 stable coins there, and that's where the network effects are, and it should only be one click or maybe even no clicks for users, as well as, hey, can we move all the other stable coins over there? They're ERC-20s. We can also send ETH over Amisa Go. So that's where I think I'm really excited, and they've basically come out on the front foot and said, this is an enterprise ready solution. It's up to you guys to onboard exchanges and other companies, and I think they've almost hinted at it in their live streams that they've got a lot of big partners coming very soon. The other thing that sped this up this month was the Reddit scaling bake-off. So Raiden showed they can do 100,000 transactions per second. XDAI have done really well. A number of other projects, and people say, well, which one's winning, which one's best? There's specific use cases. So you're going to want a plasma chain for one thing, state channels for another, optimistic roll-ups. Do you want to talk about all that as well, David? Different flavors?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's still going to be a composability fight in L2 as well, right? Because composability is neutrally just good. It's always a good thing to have. And like what to my understanding, what Amisa Go and Plasma is exclusively a payments system, and so it's very, very simple and not that composable but you can also be, if all the companies are there and everyone's present on OmiseGo, then you are composable with other companies, right? And another scaling solution that I've been paying attention to is Matic, which has a more expressive L2 that can host an ecosystem, right? And so to me, like, if you guys are from Australia, so maybe you guys have the equivalent, but to me, like, each L2 feels like the Santa Monica Pier. And the Santa Monica Pier it's this famous pier in Seattle that is just like, or not in Seattle, in California, that goes off into the water. And then there's an amusement park on it. And there's a bunch of things to do out there, but it's overall in the water. And I think each L2 is like that. And there has to be a reason to go there. But once you're there, there's a lot of activities. It's like a playground. But if you want to go back to the main chain, you have to go all the way back, right? And so there's going to be some sort of competition of like, it's going to be some sort of consolidation as to where does all the expressivity still able to exist, and where is everything else. And ultimately that will actually probably maybe start to congest that L2, right, to some degree because of its popularity. But it's really just a matter of just like having a place that is fitting for everyone that is also compromising with enabling composability.
I think Loopring is another good example using the ZK rollup that's very good for payments. But the big hope for the smart contracts and merging more complex things is the optimistic rollups that Kane and Synthetics are talking about. And I think there's talk that this is still months away. But let's say that Synthetics successfully do that. All of a sudden, you've got an exchange that's really fast and scaled, and everyone is going to kind of move there, and then it'll be up to Uniswap to implement optimistic rollups. And if Kyber don't do that, then they'll lose users. And so people are going to just keep going where the best solution is. And it might even be somewhere like 1inch that's an aggregator. They say, well, it's going to be 1 cent of gas here or $30 of gas here, and they tell you that. And again, it's just a user experience. Are you guys excited that we're kind of here and it's all just months and weeks away now?
Yeah, definitely. I think the most exciting thing to me is that it feels like we've got the solutions. Now it's just picking winners, right? I think to the interoperability and composability aspect of it, there are going to be projects that are big in the space that actually pick the winners that people adopt, because everyone's trying a bunch of different things right now. But if Uniswap, as you said, if Uniswap and Synthetics pick a layer 2 solution and it works, then other people are just going to default to picking that because they trust that these two bigger teams have done their homework, have done their research, and know that this is the best solution for them. So that right now is the open question, and that's what we're going to see play out over the next few months. I think from my kind of viewing at this point in time, in terms of layer 2, you have StarkWare and Optimism are the two leading teams right now. So you got the ZK rollups and stuff like that, and the optimistic rollups. And then on the side chain side of things, which are considered a different breed of scaling to layer 2. You have like the XDAIs of the world, right? And you have other things like Scale, SKALE, that is also like a sidechain solution, and a few other things here and there. But basically, yeah, you have the battle between the layer 2 and the sidechains, and I think they're going to live together in harmony, but it just depends on what you're doing, right? Everyone's going to build bridges to Ethereum. Everything's going to be bridged into, Ethereum, which is like, to me, it's like New York City, right? It's the hub. And then you have all these other things that bridge into it. And that's what's going to play out. But it's hard to kind of pick the winners just yet because we don't know what the kind of ecosystem will adopt as the winners. But we have a pretty good idea at this point, I think, in terms of like the rollups that we just spoke about.
And it was funny, again, a lot of people thought OmiseGo was dead, Raiden was dead, and next thing you know, Andreas and Vitalik are naming these projects by name, and it's like, wow, like they really have come back and surprised people. The other one that's really grown quickly is wrapped Bitcoin. So last Sunday, I think it was, we had more Bitcoin being wrapped than all the Bitcoin that was mined. And that to me is something I think we've spoken about in the channel before. I'm sure you guys have as well, David, that Ethereum can scale Bitcoin, and that is really upsetting the maxis. So this month we sort of saw them, I guess, throw shade at the fact that, there's no supply, there's no cap of Ethereum. And then next thing you know, they say, well, there is. It's just a bit harder to find out. And then they're saying, well, it's not as secure. And then the other day we have Ethereum fees matching Bitcoin fees, and that's the argument they've used about security. So it's just one by one, they're kind of ticking off these things. And I am so bullish on Bitcoin, but I'm so short on maximalists.
Yeah, they keep moving the goalposts, right? They do it all the time. They've been doing it for years. So at this point, to to me they're like circus animals. And that's not like that's not trying to be too mean, but it's just they're fun to look at and to like laugh at and to play around with. But a lot of the stuff that they say just doesn't map to reality, right? It doesn't make sense. They're just like it's just like watching a circus at the end of the day.
Magic crypto friends, I think you're picking on them, Anthony.
Yeah. I mean, there are some quote unquote maximalists that I actually think are okay, but most of them seem to just, I mean, everyone knows this. Most of them are very, very toxic, right? And they will attack constantly other projects, and it just to me looks like insecurity. It's like, well, if Ethereum was actually bad and actually a scam, you wouldn't need to even think about it, right? But it seems that that's all they think about.
Yeah. David, do you want to talk about the EIP-1559 and the other proposals that we've had to reduce the new supply from 2 per block to half or 1 ETH?
Yeah, absolutely. And to sink over the Bitcoiner conversation, like Bitcoin is one massive scarcity game, right? There's 21 million of them. And if you have one, then you have one of the 21 million and that's it, right? And Ethereum and staking is also a very similar like scarcity game. It just has like a few different parameters. And we're actually changing one of those parameters with EIP-1559, where if there's congestion on Ethereum and there's a lot of demand for block space, you have to signal that you want that block space more than anyone else. And the way that you do that is you burn Ether, right? That's like the new thing. That's what EIP-1559 is in a nutshell, right? And so this adds a new scarcity mechanism to Ether. And so me and Anthony and a few others, we've always passed ideas back and forth, and we've kind of come up with like these 3 pillars of Ether value accrual, Ether scarcity, because the fundamental proposition of Ether is that it's scarce. Like if somebody asks you like, why should I buy Ether? The answer is because there's a bunch of different ways, really good ways to make it scarce. And those 3 different ways are staking and providing security to the network, and that's paid with ETH issuance to secure the blockchain. Then there's ETH locked in DeFi, which is used as collateral for all of these DeFi applications. And then there's Ether burn, which is a function of how much overall economic activity there is on Ethereum, right? And so one, it makes the Ether supply go up to make sure that this game can continue. And then the other one makes this Ether supply go down, the burning, because everyone's playing the game, right? And as a result of that, there's an incentive to have as much Ether as possible because these 3 things are all pulling Ether in its own individual way and making Ether scarce in its own individual way. And you as an individual want to buy Ether to play that scarcity game because you want to accumulate Ether. And it's the same thing as, again, it's the same thing as the Bitcoin 21 million. It's just more complex and way more fun.
I think there's also maybe a 4th utility that it is. You can't use Bitcoin or any other asset to go into all these projects to become, a liquidity provider or buy this governance token or use this game. It's kind of that middle asset that gave Bitcoin a lot of value in 2017, I think, as well. So maybe that's another utility. And on paper, I really want people to understand this point. On paper, if you Google the supply, the max cap of Ethereum, it's none. And people say, oh, well, it's infinite. But that's not the case if you've got a 1% inflation rate and 2% of Ether being burned. It's actually going down every year, so it's getting more and more scarce. And I've shared the stock to flow model, and a lot of the Bitcoiners said, it's wrong, that's not right for this, that, or the other reason, but it's just a fact that the supply and it will be getting more scarce.
Yeah, it's I think because Bitcoin's very simple, right? 21 million halve every 4 years, right? That's very simple for people to wrap their heads around. But like for me, that's just too simple, right? It's just I prefer Ethereum because of the fact that we have, like as David explained, all these different things happening that are all these different games being played and things like that. And to your point, Alex, about how the issuance of ETH will actually be net negative if we had fee burn. There was actually a few days during the YAM thing where the fees were so high that even at the current issuance of about 4.5% a year for Ethereum, there were 2 days where if we had the fee burn in, it would have been net negative. So we would have actually been burning, I think it was like 7,000 and 10,000 ETH per day. So the issuance would be negative for those days. That's the end state of Ethereum with 2.0 and I mean with 1.0 for a while, but we'll probably be at 2.0 by the time this happens, where we have that 1% or less kind of issuance a year for stakers, and then the fee burn that brings that down to negative. That to me is way better than what kind of like Bitcoin's doing, and Bitcoin will probably still have issuance by the time ETH gets to this. So that's another thing that people are missing.
And that's without the proposals to reduce the ETH reward to people or stakers in future from 2 to 1 or even half. So it'd make things scarce again. But do you want to move on to a few of the other things that I've seen this month that were very interesting? We've got Coca-Cola getting on board, so just more and more corporates. And I think Ethereum Enterprise Alliance has been around for 4 years now. They've made it very easy with the products that Ernst & Young have put out, Nightfall, those type of things for the corporate world to get on board. Anything you guys want to add there from the corporate or enterprise side of adoption we've seen?
Yeah, nothing directly at corporate, but an interesting story that'll help like pave that road. So with Realty, we got axed by PayPal, and we had 2 PayPal payment mechanisms. One of them was PayPal, and then one of them was Coinbase Commerce, and then PayPal just like abruptly cut us off. And then 2 days later, we sold a whole house in like 2 hours, right? And it's just objectively that crypto payments are better. They're just better. Like as businesses, you get the assurances that it's not going to get rolled back. It's permissionless to integrate with, permissionless to receive payment from. And so coming from like the corporate world, B2B payments, B2C payments are just better with crypto, right? And so at the end of the day, like you don't, as maybe Coca-Cola or insert any company here, they don't have to do this crazy innovative thing to like use the blockchain. They just have to take payments in crypto because they're better. And we know PayPal is coming out with integrating with Bitcoin, probably Ethereum too. And at the end of the day, there's just going to be general adoption just of these things as payment rails. That's the lowest hanging fruit. And then like that's kind of just the foot in the door for anything that's more relevant and more complex. But I'm actually really bullish on just payments in the early 2020s for just all of corporate enterprise.
Yeah, there was an article out yesterday about 60,000 healthcare workers in Venezuela were owed this money, and the corruption, the government blocked it. And then they came out and they were able to pay everyone with crypto and stable coins. And then the Venezuelan government like blocked this website, and so this company just pushed out a message saying, hey, you need to use, this VPN or this workaround, or maybe even just as simple as Brave browser and block the trackers or whatnot. And so they bypassed all that, and these 60,000 healthcare workers got their money that directly to people, bypassing banks. This is what the Fed, I think this is the big, call it MMT, call it Trump's handout, whatever you want, direct payments through FedCoin, FedApp or whatever. I think that's the next big thing in the macro investing world. Any thoughts there to add, guys? Or
no, I mean, I just basically mirror what David said. Crypto has been spoken about as like this freedom tool for a while now to bypass all these things, and it's not just to bypass things that are illegal. It's also to bypass, I guess, things that are illegal in certain countries that shouldn't be, right? Where these countries are just basically imposing these draconic laws on their citizens, trying to keep, capital controls, all that sort of stuff. And crypto just helps people with that. And there's plenty of examples and plenty of stories about how it is doing that. Within Bitcoin as well, to be fair, like people are using Bitcoin for that as well. But with Ethereum and kind of like dollars, people can do it with stable assets, which I think is just the next level.
Yeah. Final thing that we've got is the ETH2, the testnet. So there was an issue here. I've read a little bit about this. It's always funny to me when the smartest people in the world have their new technology, bleeding edge stuff stopped because the clock was wrong, and then they told everyone to like restart their computer, and everyone did it at the same time, so no one knew what was actually happening. And to me it's so funny when I hear this smart guys doing these basic things wrong. But did one of you guys want to walk us through the testnet, what stage that's at, and what happened?
Yeah, I think I can give a quick overview here without going too technical into it. So I think we spoke about it last time, Alex. Maybe not last time, but basically this testnet called Madasha or Madala. It's weird how some people say it, but if you've read it, it's like Madala. But basically, this is the quote unquote final multi-client testnet before we have a mainnet for ETH2 Phase 0 coming out. Now, this ran for a few weeks, and then it kind of ran into this critical bug. And you're right, it had to do with like clocks and clock syncing. I'm not going to go into the technicals because it gets quite technical. But what happened was that one of the clients on the network, the Prism client, which is from Prismatic Labs, people who have heard of them, they took up 70% of the network. So what happened was all these clients went basically offline, like vanished off the network. So 70% of the network was just gone. Now the ETH2 network needs 66% participation to kind of like finalize, to keep going. So the network obviously went offline. It couldn't finalize anymore. But what was really bullish is the fact that they fixed this issue, right? And then after a few days and a few people getting slashed and losing a bit of testnet money, which is fine, the network came back. They didn't have to restart the testnet. The network came back alive. It was saved. It didn't have to be rolled back or anything like that. It continued on just as it should. And that is basically one of the core developments within ETH2 and within the protocol, is that it needs to be resilient to these things. And it is. Yeah, there was damage done and like whatever, but the core was still intact, right? So then that's what happened. And now it's been chugging along just fine. I think it's up to 75% participation or something like that. On mainnet, we expect it to be like high 90s all the time because there's real money at stake. But because this is testnet money, no one really cares, right? If their validator goes offline, they're like, oh, well, it's testnet money. I'll sort it out later. But if it goes offline with your real ETH, you're going to fix that within like minutes, right?
Yeah. You're not going to want to get that slashed and lose your money for doing the wrong thing. But it's really cool that, as you say, it kept spitting out blocks, but no one knew what was happening. And then once everyone got back in sync, it all sort of finalized and confirmed everything, and it was chugging along nicely again. So maybe just the final thing you guys wanted to mention was everyone's hyped about DeFi at the moment. I think it's getting a little bit bubbly in some areas, and as we spoke about yield farming and all these crazy named products, I think that's getting crazy, as well as all the other layer one protocols saying, hey, we're pivoting to DeFi now as well. But DAOs is one that you're excited about. I'm really excited about gaming as well. But I just want people to understand that DeFi is just one aspect. We're going to have decentralized web, so D-Web, where it's all these layers and computing and file storage. You know, that's another thing. Then D-Gaming, then decentralized organization. So there's all these things that can happen on Ethereum. It's like rebuilding the whole internet again.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the reason why the kind of crypto gaming and DAOs hasn't taken off too much yet is because of scaling, because it's very, like, obviously the Ethereum mainnet is limited in what it can do. So when we have these scaling things coming online, we're seeing a lot of these gaming projects be the first ones to adopt these things, because they're like, well, as I said before, they're priced out. They need to adopt these things in order to get back in the game. Pun intended. And then the DAOs are kind of like the same thing. But also I think DAOs are having a kind of renaissance because of the fact that DeFi has grown. And a lot of the protocols within DeFi are actually using DAOs to manage them, right? With the governance tokens, with voting, with all this sort of stuff. So people are getting more used to the fact that we can have these DAOs play out, and like we can actually have them for everything, not just DeFi.
And how would you describe a DAO, David, for the beginners at home?
Oh, I actually have a pretty alternative definition of a DAO than what most people most people think. Like MakerDAO is actually less of a DAO than like Uniswap, for example. A DAO is something that just like perpetuates, and a MakerDAO needs something with human intervention. So like the true definition of a DAO is something that has code at the center and humans at the fringes, right? So there's no actual human subjectivity involved. But at the same time, you can kind of assume that like human incentives can kind of take over that automaticity, right? And so the human incentives of MakerDAO means that the Maker governors will always make sure that the Maker protocol is up and running. And so to some degree, you can kind of trust as a vault holder that thing is just basically automatic because of the incentives there. So at the same time, we have these very protocolized things like Uniswap. We also have DAOs like MakerDAO. Compound is now a DAO. Actually, anything with governance is basically a DAO now, right? And so Yearn, Yiffy is a DAO. If there's like Yams are a DAO. If there's a treasury and there's governance over that treasury, I guess we have a DAO. And so I think it's really just a new sci-fi version of like a company on the stock market, right? This is the new, if that was a 2D version, this is now the 3D version. If that was like the pen and paper version, this is now the digitally native version. These are digitally native companies that are really actually just protocols, and they're governed over with tokens.
So it stands for decentralized autonomous organizations. As David said, it sort of perpetuates and keeps going. And the example I want to give to people is recently the American company that was doing the trading, Arbra, they got a slap on the wrist from the SEC. Now, someone like Synthetics is trying to do decentralized trading, and they recently listed a lot of the indexes. So if the SEC wants to come after them, well, they are now guided by actual 3 separate DAOs, the decision making, and it's just code. So the SEC can't issue code, a letter, or call them into Congress or fine anyone. And it's all these anonymous nodes or Ethereum addresses that can make the rules and vote on what happens next and perpetuate and move that forward. So this is the unstoppable nature. And maybe they go after the internet. And that's why we're building decentralized VPNs and decentralized internet, then decentralized servers and file storage. So that's the whole stack. That's decentralized web. We'll get into that in future episodes. Is there anything else that either of you guys wanted to say to wrap up?
Just that you brought up a good point there with DAOs, in that you know, a lot of these companies behind these protocols are starting to decentralize really fast because of regulatory reasons, right? If there's no one that a regulatory body can go after, then it makes it a lot less prone to attack, I guess. Like you could define it as like an attack on the protocol. So I'm noticing this across the entire spectrum. Everyone wants to decentralize now, which is very healthy because that's what we want. We don't want these heads anymore. But at the same time, some are doing it too early, where they don't have a community yet, and they do it, and then no one's there except the original team. And then of course the regulatory body can still be like, oh well, you're still heavily involved in it. You know, you still have power over it, so we're going to come after you, which is the other side of the coin.
Yeah. Another good pun.
It's something that just happened very recently was that, or actually like an hour ago, is that the proposal for the Yearn DAO to make a vote over the Curve DAO, because Yearn has a treasury with Curve tokens in it, which are another DAO token. And so something that's really interesting is that we have this DAO making decisions in another DAO. And that if that's not sci-fi, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, and Aragon that are like a DAO company are going to court in the real world. So there you go. That's sci-fi as well.
I remember that. Yeah, that was funny when I saw that.
Well, guys, that's been awesome. I'd love to even get Ryan involved next time. I think these episodes are going to continue to get longer because there's so much happening. But I hope you guys have enjoyed that at home. Thanks for joining me, Anthony and David. I'll put the links to follow them down below, and we'll talk to you guys again soon. Cheers.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.